Greetings, dear listeners. This is Jonah Goldberg, host of the Remnant Podcast, brought to you by the Dispatch and Dispatch Media. I know I often say I'm very excited about today's guest, but I'm actually very excited about today's guest because I often say in internet years, I'm Methuselah. In podcast years, today's guest is sort of a Lovecraftian figure. He's one of the old ones from the ancient times. He's been doing EconTalk, which is easily one of my favorite podcasts and has been for a very long time. I got so much out of it diving into back episodes when I was working on my last book. I included it in the acknowledgments of my book. And one of the highlights of my entire career was being the favorite podcast on EconTalk in 2018, I believe it was, according to listener survey. Russ Roberts is now in Israel. He is the president of Shalem College. He is also, besides EconTalk and Shalem College, he's a fellow at the Hoover Institution. His last book, which he was last on here to talk about a while ago, is Wild Problems, which I actually was just diving into the other day for various and sundry reasons, and it's really a great book. So, Russ, welcome back to the Remnant.
Great to be back, Jonah. Thanks for having me.
So as I was saying, I want to get to some of the Israel things, but it's pivoting to Israel is easier than pivoting from Israel.
So true.
So what I kind of wanted to do was, and you were clear that you are not paying granular attention to American economic stuff these days, which is fine. We're going to go not just macro, but meta. But you had a great conversation the other day, or the other week, I guess, on EconTalk. You told the story about how years ago you were talking to Milton Friedman, and you said you were talking about glorifying how we free market economists won these arguments, we settled these debates about this, that, and the other thing, and about price controls and all that. And Uncle Milty said, no, not really. Basically, just the Americans had to relearn those lessons because elites forgot those lessons. I feel like we're in that kind of moment now. Like when you have to spend a whole episode explaining, division of labor, which you also did recently, or that tariffs are paid by the importer. I feel like we're all going back to Econ 101 these days. Do you find it frustrating? Is that why you're sort of doing more sort of sweet mystery of life kind of topics on your podcast?
Well, sweet mystery of life's another subject. We'll talk about that if you want. But I was very frustrated about the tariff conversation because a lot of people on X, where I spend too much time now and then, so why haven't you done anything on this? And I'm thinking, well, I spent most of my life as an economist on it, and I kind of said all I had to say, and you can find it. It's out there. I wrote a novel that teaches people how trade works. I've written a few dozen, essays. Just look it up. But of course, that's not enough. Nobody wants to look it up, and they don't know to look it up. So it is a little frustrating. What Milton Friedman said was related to price controls. I was saying that, economists had taught the world the costs of price controls, that they seem attractive. Oh, cheap goods. But economists point out that means that people lose the incentive to bring those goods to market. It leads to black market activity. It can often lead to very wasteful lines, people getting in line when they could do other things with their life. And I said, we won that one, as you implied. And he said, no. He said, this is 2006, right before he died. He said, no. When the generation that lived through the price controls of the 70s and 80s, when they die, it'll have to be relearned again. And I thought, really? Now I think, yeah, really. Because he said, we didn't win that debate. We didn't prove anything. People experienced it and they didn't like it. Mm-hmm. And then when people die or get older and forget what it was like, it's so appealing. Cheap stuff, price controls. So similarly with tariffs, importers, you could argue pay for tariffs, but Usually it's actually, they pass those costs on to their consumers.
Sure.
So Americans, we have a lot of tariff revenue coming in the last month or so. I saw it's a tax increase. It's nothing, it's fun to think of it being paid by foreigners, but it's not. It's a tax increase on Americans. So economics is generally a little bit unintuitive, and the study of economics makes the unintuitive intuitive, which is lovely. But most people don't study it, and understandably so. And so life is where they get most of their lessons. And we'll get some lessons here about tariffs, maybe. The world's complicated. Sometimes it's hard to draw the right conclusion from a life experience. So I'm not sure we'll learn lessons from tariffs that will last for a generation, but we'll see.
Right, but so it's not just tariffs, right? So obviously, I mean, as you know, I'm more frustrated. I get more angry when my side, quote unquote side, forgets the things it's supposed to know.
Yeah. Sure.
I expect the other side, so to speak, to forget the things that they don't want to know. There's a difference, right?
Yeah.
And so when I spend too much time on Twitter as well. And the other day, the White House, social media shop put out a thing bragging about how much tariff revenue they're putting in. And I said, first time in my lifetime, a Republican administration is bragging about increased revenues from a tax increase.
Yeah.
And the people who respond to me are like, you moron, you don't understand this is, and then the full stream of mistake, like it's all paid by the exporters, or these like goalpost moving things where don't you want to pay down the debt?
Yeah.
And to be honest, it's not the tax I would pick by any stretch of the imagination. But if I had any faith that they were going to pay down the debt with it, I'd be much less opposed. But they're now talking about a tariff rebate, which is just bread and circuses, profligate spending. And so, but anyway,
it's a deep moment, I think. I spend too much time getting frustrated sometimes about these kind of issues, but I think if we step back, we can see a very profound lesson that applies to all of us, which is our identity and sense of self is often wrapped up in either an ideology or a party or a person, which is really weird, but it's what people like. Adam Smith writes about it interestingly in the Theory of Moral Sentiments. He talks about how much we like our kings and how we root for them to have heroic lives. And if they die tragically, it's like it ruins the plot. We wanted to just kind of enjoy the great happy ending. And this is a weird part of being a human being. I think it's useful to recognize it in oneself. And we all have it to some extent, a desire for our team to be the good guys and the other team to be the bad guys. And so we twist our narratives. It's very, it's not surprising what you just described. It's par for the course, and it's everywhere right now in all kinds of issues.
Yeah, so that's the sort of meta level I wanted to get to. Zohran Mamdani, running for mayor of New York, he wants government-run grocery stores, which my favorite aspect of that, it's kind of a piñata. You can come at it from any angle and get some reward, but is his claim that because government grocery stores could buy wholesale, they could get prices down, as if Giant and Safeway buy all of their groceries retail.
They go to farmers markets with a lot of different folks, and they have their bicycles have very large baskets or saddlebags to fill up with the produce. So that's what they're doing now. It turns out there's an alternative wholesale. Who knew?
Yeah. But so this idea of socialism never going away, right, is I've come to the view that there are a few smart, interesting, actual socialists who care about data stuff, But
Yeah.
very quickly you realize that they're talking about social democracy and they're talking about a more generous welfare state. They're not actually talking about Marxism or anything like that. And the extent to which Marxism is a thing, it operates much more as a religion and
For sure.
as a form of tribalism than anything else. And I'm just wondering, like, is this the future of economics? That is if reason is the slave to the passions, is economics going to be the slave to this sort of human desire for living in a tribe for the rest of our lives?
No, we're going to be the only field that's just filled with truth seekers who just look at data and nuanced conclusions. Uh, we have our own tribe and our own religion called free markets or whatever version of classical liberalism you particularly ascribe to. I like to think my religion's a little more evidence based and less dogmatic. But stepping back from that and just focusing on your, I think, insight about why this is so appealing.
Mm-hmm.
Capitalism is full of flaws, even whatever version you want to talk about, whether it's US capitalism or crony capitalism or a pure idyllic capitalism that's never happened, but we like to imagine, and it might be something to strive for. And all of those different kinds of capitalism, things go wrong for some people. And I think my view on this, I'd be curious on your take. My view on this is that when people say they're socialist, what they mean is they don't like the status quo.
Mm-hmm.
There are things they don't like about the American economic system, say. There's plenty not to like. I get it. And they want something better. Who doesn't? It's a wonderful impulse. If you press them as to what is better, they'll sometimes say, I'm not sure, but surely we could do better than this.
Mm-hmm.
This profit-driven, self-interested, exploitive fill in the blank system. Or they might be specific. They might say, I think government-run grocery stores would be an improvement on the current system. When they lay out something like that, and certainly when they give an example like it'll buy wholesale and they'll buy wholesale and the profiteers won't, you can see it's not so persuasive.
Mm-hmm.
But let's say you accept the fact that they don't have that advantage, that other private grocery chains also buy wholesale. And you say, well, but it won't be driven by profits. It'll be driven by a desire to help people. And you could say, well, how will that work? I mean, you could take a cheap shot. You could say, in actual socialist economies, grocery store life is deeply depressing.
Mm-hmm.
I tell the story in one of my books of a Soviet Union refugee coming to the United States, and we were assigned to help them acculturate to the United States, and we took them to a grocery store. You'd think we'd taken them to the Sistine Chapel. They wanted to linger in the produce section. They were amazed. I think they probably thought it was fake or built for them, or and I tell the story in there of the wife wanting to have some yeast and we couldn't find it. So I asked someone and the person brings it out and the wife looks at me like, oh, he's got protexia. He's got power. When he asks for the yeast, they bring it out. They don't bring it out for everybody. I tried to explain to her, yes, they do. They just hadn't stocked it. So if you told that story to the candidate for mayor, he would say, oh, that's not what I mean. Of course, I don't mean like a Soviet system. So what do you mean? Well, how about that it would price more fairly? Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. That's a legitimate thing. You could have a grocery store with lower prices. There would be an incentive problem. The people who run the grocery maybe wouldn't pick the best produce because they don't profit from it, but maybe they're so idealistic it'll be okay. Then you could ask, well, who's going to pay for it? Well, it won't be the customer, so it'll be somebody else. It'll be the taxpayers. Maybe that's okay. So if you pick one little corner, you want to be a little more, quote, socialist. It's not the end of the system. It's not the end of the world. In a wonderful world, it could even be run somewhat well. Or it could be run like Venezuela,
right?
Where there's nothing on the shelves half the time and nobody cares. So that's at least a real world example. But the general impulse toward a better system is very understandable. And, as voters, we don't pay the price for our mistakes directly. Our vote's very negligible in the grand scheme of things. So we often use it to express a yearning. I get that. I get it. But I don't think it's going to turn out so well. We'll see. We'll get some evidence, about that wholesale buying Manhattan grocery store. I can't wait.
Well, that's my point about the Milton Friedman anecdote is, as Edmund Burke says, example is the school of mankind and he will learn it no other, right? You sometimes have to show people, you can't just tell people.
Yeah.
But that, like vaccines, we shouldn't have to, I'm totally open to data-driven arguments about when a vaccine is worth it and who should take, all those things are fine. But this idea that vaccines qua vaccines are bad,
strange idea.
It really does show you how, like Carl Sagan always used to point out that if you took a globe that had a varnish on it, that the varnish was about was to scale, that it was about as thick as the Earth's atmosphere, which shows you how small Earth's atmosphere is. That's how I feel about a lot of accumulated wisdom these days, is that it's just this tiny little thing. You all have to do is scratch at it a little bit and you can clear it away and you get back to these lessons that I kind of thought we had pocketed.
Yeah. No, it's absolutely, I find it, again, when I'm not depressed by it, I find it so interesting. First of all, if you think about it, the number of people engaged in this conversation about, say, vaccines or socialism or Israel war in Gaza, it's unimaginably larger, that number, than 50 years ago or 100 years ago on any public policy issue. So you have people who have tremendous access to information. Unfortunately, a lot of it's wrong. It's misleading, dishonest, or just an error.
Or they don't know how to read it.
Or they don't know how to consume it, yeah. And so a lot of people who normally would not be in the expert class, who would be sparring over, whether price controls, say, wage and price. I'll pick an example from my youth. President Nixon puts on wage and price controls. This is in the early 19th, I think it's 1971, if I remember correctly, but it's around then. Some really smart people argued about it. There are about 12 of them. There's no social media. Now, it's a more bigger number. It's a few million argue about it. They think they're important, by the way. And those of us who are in those arguments think we're important because we're, telling the truth and correcting error. It's the old, honey, let's go to bed. I'll be there in a minute. Somebody on the internet said something that isn't true. I have to fix it. Yeah. Gonna be a long night. So that's, if you're, I think if you're H.L. Mencken, you'd appreciate this moment. He would appreciate this moment of this incredible democratization of both expertise and intellectual sparring. And it's sloppy. It's really sloppy. And I say that, and I know you agree, knowing that it was also sloppy in 1971. It was just a different kind of sloppiness. It wasn't like the Roman Forum or Plato's Academy of people sitting around wisely opining on things with great intellectual probity.
So you dropped, true to form, a reference to Adam Smith talking about how people root for their kings and their monarchs and all that.
Even bad kings, by the way.
For sure. Yeah.
It's like Stalin's the most popular. Stalin's popularity in Russia today is high. It's like, how is that possible?
But it reminds me of sort of a reverse point. In Julian Benda's Treason of the Intellectuals, he points out that it used to be, before the age of basically populist nationalism, romantic nationalism, whatever you want to call it, the king got to decide what was in his kingdom's honor, right? And the national honor, which is kind of a new concept, right? Because lots of kingdoms had many nations in them. But now there's this notion of national honor, and it's up to the people to decide what's in the nation's honor, and the kings then have to go with the, there go the people, I am their leader, so I must go with them, right? And that feels like a big chunk of public policy these days is pretextual. And that's what I find incredibly I feel like you got frustrated about 15 years earlier than I did. And you come from a different place and you have a different career and all that kind of stuff. But yeah. I like arguments. I like disagreements. But I now find that so much of our public policy debates, writ large, writ small, pick your scale, people start with the conclusion and then reason backwards for them. And you see this you see this every 5 minutes from the Trump administration, but the most recent one is just simply the this firing of the head of BLS, where Trump says she was rigging it for political reasons, and then you have all of these people, with their brooms behind the elephant, try to explain, no, that's not, there's a real methodological problem with the BLS, and there's, look at these error rates and all these kinds of things. And what they're trying to do is just come up with an argument that doesn't make this decision look as bad as it is. And it's just doubly ironic, I think, with the BLS thing, because there does seem to be this concerted desire not to have the data. Like the arguments that you were talking about, I agree with you. They were messy in the 1970s. And maybe it's the rust of nostalgia coloring my view on this. But it seemed like the complaint was we can't get good data. But if we had it, we could settle this, which has its own empirical epistemological problems. And now there is this thing about, well, we have good data, but it tells us the things we don't want to hear. So let's get rid of the data. I mean, the Trump administration is planning or trying to shutter 2 CO2 measuring satellites that do a fantastic job of collecting data because they don't want the data. And that seems worse to me. I don't know. Am I crazy?
I'm going to start with a story.
Okay.
I have a friend. He's very smart, super smart. Really, I learned a lot from him. And one day I told him that a psychological study by professional psychologists was wrong, wasn't right. And he laughed at me. And I said, what's funny? He goes, this was done by somebody from Harvard. This conversation is about 5 years ago.
Okay.
He says, it was done by somebody from Harvard. I said, yeah. He said, it was peer reviewed. I said, yeah. So you're telling me that some journal published a peer reviewed study by somebody from Harvard that isn't true? And this was before what's now called the replication crisis. The law results of psychology don't hold up. And I've internalized that so much, that reality that peer reviewed from a Harvard professor actually isn't worth so much. Doesn't mean it's false, but it isn't a stamp of truth. That when you tell me, I think some people find a pre-existing conclusion and then look back for things. And I'm thinking, I wonder when it was that became my way of looking at the world. Because it did. There became a moment where I realized, and it was a very jarring moment, and it probably wasn't a single moment. It was probably an accumulation of experiences that Edmund Burke would appreciate, where I realized, oh my goodness. The first realization is that guy I'm arguing with, he made up his mind beforehand. Oh my goodness. And then the even more alarming realization, which doesn't come right away, but eventually comes if you're a little bit thoughtful, maybe I do the same thing. Oh my goodness. When I think about the things that I believe are true, that are life-changing, things like compound interest is more powerful than you know. Let me show you. And I can show that to you. But if you tell people the first time that I think some people actually make up their mind first and then try to find out things to make it sound better. It's really an ugly and terrible way to look at humanity. But I believe that as much as I believe anything in this world. And I didn't always. And I
Yeah.
wonder when it was that I came to that realization. But one last thing. This moment, meaning this crazy world we live in with social media and uh, kind of the death of expertise alongside maybe the death of truth, the unending use of what will soon be unbearably many AI generated photos and videos that deceive people. And it's, what's great is you don't need AI. What's amazing is that, you can prove that Israel is enjoying starving children without AI. I mean, there is some AI out there that helps people believe that, but you don't need that. You can find other ways to do it, and people who want to believe it. It's a very strange time because, as I said, through most of human intellectual history, most people just were facing the rear end of a cow as it worked its way through the field, and they were plowing. Now that we have people who have enough leisure time to explore data and evidence, it's dark. It's very dark.
So let's just switch gears because I could go down this rabbit hole for a while, and pretty soon I'll start talking about Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft, and then where will we be? But do you mind if I do a little ombudsman work on EconTalk here?
Go ahead, whatever you want.
So, love Leon Cass. Love Leon Cass. I'm a Russ Roberts super fan, right? So, do not like Rousseau. For listeners, you had Leon Cass, who's a brilliant scholar, who's now a colleague of yours in Israel, which I did not know. And he is, I don't think I'm telling tales out of school. Either are rumors he's a Straussian, but he is he's a deep scholar of Jean-Jacques Rousseau and has forgotten more on a Wednesday about Rousseau than I will ever know, stipulating all of these things. Much like you know more about compound interest than I will ever learn. So stipulated. And I think you said at the beginning of the episode that you always had a certain amount of negative feelings about Rousseau.
Yep.
Probably for many of the same reasons that I do.
Absolutely.
The line in the second discourse where he says the first person to put up a fence and say this property is mine was the root of all evil is not right. But the thing I found frustrating about the conversation, learned a lot. I knew some of that stuff because I've done my spelunking on Rousseau, but it was fun to listen to him do his close reading thing.
Yeah.
And I agree, Rousseau's full of interesting insights. And we can discard the fact that in his personal life, he was a pretty scummy guy. Yeah. All those things notwithstanding, you didn't get into the question of whether or not Rousseau's anthropology, right, was correct, right? He has this theory of human nature based upon what I would argue is just a falsehood, right? Is now, at least, I know all the experts are not to be trusted anymore, but man did not live a solitary life of nobility by himself as nature boy in the woods. We've always wanted to be in a group, and a worldview and a philosophy built upon a story about human origins that isn't true is going to be problematic. Anyway, so is that a fair point at the beginning so we can get to that? Get that far?
Well, I guess I'd say if you're dissatisfied with that episode, you should invite Leon Cass to talk about Rousseau
I think I might.
The Remnant.
But I'm scared to. But I
good idea. Well, here's what's interesting. Let me give you my take on it, and then you can see if I made you feel better. I've never read Rousseau. I'm not as actually you've forgotten more on a Wednesday than I'll know about Rousseau in a lifetime. Basically, the page and a half or so that Leon and I read together in a close reading was my only textual reading of Rousseau in my lifetime. And I just never thought he was worth reading, which is stupid, narrow-minded, closed-minded. So what I liked about it was that he gives a very, I would say, poetic, certainly not anthropological, because it's armchair theorizing, as you're pointing out correctly. I have no idea if he's correct. No one does, but there's no reason to think he's got it right. The origins of humans, solitary versus group experiences. But the reason I like that conversation and the reason I like Rousseau is that he gets at something quite profound about our group experiences, which is, by the way, overwhelmingly outside the main methodological thrust of modern economics in terms of what motivates people. And I would just say he's onto something.
Oh, I agree with that, yeah.
And I enjoyed thinking about that. That's all. I wouldn't say anything more than that. It's very important. I like Smith a lot, obviously, Adam Smith. And I also I've read a small amount that resonates deeply with me of F.A. Hayek. I'm not a Hayek scholar by any means. It's relatively easy to be a Smith scholar. I only read 2 books. One of them's fat and has some really difficult passages. The other one's pretty fat and has some difficult passages, but they're pretty much accessible. Hayek wrote a lot more, and there's more difficult passages. So, but I've read some, and I love a lot of what I've read, and some of it I don't agree with. And it's amazing how when people will write me or come up to me, or used to when I was more of identified as a Hayek person, and say, Hayek on page 73 of The Road to Serfdom says, it's okay to have Social Security or whatever it is, fill in the blank. And I say, yeah. Would you agree with that? And sometimes the answer would be, yeah, I do. Or I'd say, no, I disagree. Well, what? But you don't agree with Hayek on that. Yeah, no, I don't. I don't agree with that on everything. Well, then, I said, then what? I never pretended, and no one should pretend. This is the intellectual version of the story we're telling about kings earlier. F.A. Hayek did not come down from Mount Sinai with The Road to Serfdom. He sat in a room and he wrote it as a human being, and there might be some things in there I don't like. Okay. I try to learn from different people. I don't need to have intellectual idols that are perfect. And Rousseau is imperfect both in the breadth of what he writes and his personal life. And he's not my role model. He's not my mentor. But you could learn something from him. At least those 2 pages. I really don't have a horse this race.
Yeah, no. That's all fine. What I was trying to set up here is, and I'm again trying to resist the Gemeinschaft, Gesellschaft thing, or as Hayek would put it, macrocosm, is I've long had this belief. So when I was a television producer, I produced a TV show called Think Tank, right? It was very wonky. Ben Wattenberg was the host. And we, after a few years, decided there were only 17 public policy issues. And people just re-argue them over and over and over again, right? And then I came to this conclusion later on that pretty much all of them boil down to Locke versus Rousseau. Now you can do Smith versus whoever, they're just avatars for 2 approaches, right?
Yeah.
Sort of the individual is sovereign. We are captains of ourselves. Fruits of our labors belong to us guy. And we're all part of the general will is more important than the individual will, and the collective is more important than the individual. And it's basically team versus individual. And
did you write this up in a book, Jonah?
I've written bits and pieces about this quite a few times.
But you should write a whole book on this. This is a great sell. You start off with the 17, then you work down to the 2. You're done. It's a great book. It's 140 pages, and it'll sell like hotcakes.
Yeah, because everyone wants to hear about the 17 public policy issues. And
they might.
But my point is we tend to talk about politics as if there's Team Rousseau, which I think is Marx on down, is like the left is pretty much Team Rousseau. Blank slateism, all that kind of stuff, even though blank slate also has a Locke thing to it. And the reality is it all runs through the human heart, right? The line versus the line between Locke and Rousseau runs straight through the human heart. We're all a little Lockean in that we all want to be recognized as something special and and a unique person. And we also want to be part of a team. We want to be part of something bigger, right? And
beautiful.
And
it's the last chapter. It's going to be a great book. Go ahead. I love it.
But so it seems to me, let me put it this way. So it seems to me much of your career has been team macrocosm, right? The Gesellschaft, the extended order of contracts, commerce, property, exchange, all that kind of stuff. In the last 15 years, I shouldn't say 15 years, last 5 years, you've gotten much more Gemeinschaft, much more microcosm about Judaism, about wild problems, about family, about group.
Purpose of life.
And I'm just kind of curious. The last time you were on, I accused you of being a recovering economist, and you said, there's some truth to that. Do you still consider yourself a recovering economist? Because the larger big picture thing, and then I'll just shut up, is I think the problem we have, and this is something I probably learned from you 10 times over, is that too many people in politics want to take the microcosm of friends, family, Gemeinschaft, all that stuff, and make the macrocosm work that way. And some people want to make the microcosm work like the macrocosm, and you destroy both by doing so. And it seems like in your intellectual journey, you are trying to find a happy medium between these two things. Is that fair? Am I putting you on the couch too much?
No, I like that. I think that's interesting. I guess I would say it a little differently. I'm not looking so much for a happy medium. I find more truth in both of them together than I did when I only looked at one. Mm-hmm. The macrocosm thing is in The Fatal Conceit by Hayek, by the way, that listeners may want to take a look at. It's a beautiful passage.
I think it's a great book. There's a controversy about how much he wrote, but we are not going to do any of that crap.
Who cares?
Yeah, I agree.
Who cares?
I agree.
It's a great book. It's 108 pages, I think. And as I mentioned the other day on EconTalk, I've given it away to a lot of people and nobody reads it.
Yeah.
So, but maybe we'll pick up 2 or 3 extra readers from this conversation. It's a special book, but it's a bit of a slog. It's slow going. It's dense, full of ideas. Every page is interesting. Some people don't like books like that. I get it. But when you think about this, the journey you're talking about, for me, I specialized. I got a PhD in economics, a particular kind of economics, University of Chicago in the 1970s economics, which is a straitjacket. Every bit of human behavior gets pushed into being powered by incentives and market forces. And incentives, if you're a good economist trained at Chicago, you recognize there's different kinds of incentives, not just monetary incentives. There's time and there's prestige and there are other things people care about, but they're hard to remember. So we tend to spend a lot of time thinking about incentives. Mm-hmm. We had a conversation 20 minutes ago about a government-run grocery store. My view of that is overwhelmingly informed by incentive issues, and that the people who run it, it's hard to run a grocery. The people who run them now in the private sector struggle to stay in business.
Right.
Their profit margins are small. They're, again, if you think about what a modern American grocery store looks like in human history, it's a stunning museum piece of achievement. Yeah. It's aesthetically pleasing. The cornucopia of it is mind-boggling. So when you say to me, I think I could do it better, as an economist, my first thought is, it's really hard and you won't have the incentives. But if you remember 20 minutes ago, I did throw a bone to the argument that maybe somebody who's highly motivated, could do something better for certain groups because they care so much. They're not motivated by money. They're motivated by love or passion or virtue signaling. I mean, there are a lot of different theories. And so when I think about my intellectual view of the human experience, when I was 26 years old and graduated with a PhD, it was really embarrassingly narrow view that many people older than I was at the time also embraced in its entirety. And as I've gotten older, I've realized that sometimes it doesn't quite capture everything about what makes us tick. And that's got disadvantages. I'm not as confident as I used to be about why people do things and when I can predict what they'll do. But it feels richer. I like the richer view. And sometimes when I see economists opining on X or Y, I think, well, they don't always imagines that there's something outside their philosophy, Horatio. So there's more in heaven and earth. That's all. I don't think that's, I always wonder when I was younger and I was an ideologue. I think I'm still an ideologue, but I'm less of one. It's kind of what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. And I'd look at people who'd left the faith. They'd become more open-minded or more open to other theories of whatever. And I'd look at them with pity because I'd say, they had the truth. Why would they walk away? Give a great example. And I don't know much about it, so it's okay that I might be butchering it. Robert Nozick had a huge impact on me when I was 20 years old, and I read Anarchy, State, and Utopia. And evidently, some point late in his life, he became less convinced that his worldview was 100% absolutely correct. Mm-hmm. He may have even abandoned libertarianism. I'm not quite, again, I don't want to pretend I know enough about him to say so, but certainly people told me he'd abandoned his faith. He betrayed us. I thought, yeah, poor guy. What happened? Somebody must put something in his coffee. Well, I think he just got older and a little bit wiser, but still a great book. I think you can still read it with profit. It's very beautifully written. It's incredibly entertaining and can be enjoyed. But that's sort of the way I think about it. Is this? I have my tools are less sharp. I have more tools and they're not as sharp as they used to be. So that's good if you're cutting the wrong thing. And it's bad if you need that sharp knife you used to use so well and wield so deftly, but it's okay. Yeah.
I mean, I'm on this podcast isn't about me, but I'm on a different journey because I've probably never been more ideologically grounded, but politically homeless. Yeah. And that's liberating too, because all of a sudden you don't feel any, or you can resist and reject any pressure to take a position that you don't sincerely hold. And I'm not saying I was some partisan hack before.
No, you weren't. You were very thoughtful.
But there's different now.
There's less cognitive dissonance in your life. There's less moments where you go, I wonder if is that true?
Right. And there's less deference to people everybody's decided this is the position, so therefore that's got to be my position. It's like, no, they're wrong. So I'm not going to take that position.
The amazing thing for me, and tell me if you agree, is that you and I used to hold what I would call mainstream views. Now, I was in a particularly small part of the mainstream when I held those views, but they were widely identified and respected, and not so much respected, but at least tolerated, and people knew what they meant. And there's, our homelessness is not just, say, partisan or ideological. It's that the axes of the intellectual landscape have been so redrawn that there's no little corner for us anymore.
No, I agree. I mean,
we're not the same. We're in slightly different corners, but it doesn't matter. We're off the chart.
For sure. I mean, I talk about this with Jonathan Rauch a few times. I mean, people like Jonathan Rauch, he's a left of center guy.
Yeah.
But he's a fact-driven, data-driven, reasonable person. I can have a much longer, more fruitful conversation with him or our mutual friend Paul Bloom or any of these other people across the ideological chasm, because that's not the relevant chasm anymore, right? I mean, there's whole other implosion of the landscape all around me, and I'll take people who are open-minded and want to have an argument about stuff, even if I think their priors are wrong about most things, if they're honest about it, over a lot of other people. So anyway,
those other folks,
yes, the people in the other quadrants. I don't want to abuse your time, but I did want to get to Israel and the situations there. I'll just drop the hockey puck, and you can knock in any direction that you want. How do you think things are going now?
Well, we're recording this on August 5th.
5th, yeah.
5th, yeah. So we just finished what I would say is one of the darker 2 weeks of the Israeli moment, experience, perspective. We had a whole set of examples where Israelis or Jews were like either chased or abused. We had children coming back from a summer camp in Spain. French kids were taken off a flight. At first, this we're talking earlier about facts. Some people have contended, I think this is just an outright lie, that some of those kids said death to Arabs. I'm pretty confident that they didn't say that. At first, it was said said things like that they spit, that they sang really loud songs in Hebrew and wouldn't stop. I think what actually happened is that something was shouted in Hebrew across an aisle, as far as I can tell. It's really hard to tell. It's a horrible thing about all these experiences. And so episodes, you can't tell where the truth lies. Very hard. So we had that. They were dragged off the plane. Their counselor was handcuffed on the ground. The kids I think they were 12. Years old. They had to wait for 10 hours in the airport without anybody telling them what was going on. That was bad. We had a couple Israeli tourists chased around the island of Rhodes. We had a tour ship in Cyprus that wasn't allowed to land because it was, quote, too dangerous, because there were protesters, anti-Israel protesters waiting for the boat to land. We had the terrible worry, with some truth, but not as much as was discussed, that Gazans who have a horrible time, understandably, in a war, were being purposely starved to death. And the evidence for that was a series of photographs of pitiful children, emaciated children, who evidently, mostly, maybe all of them, were suffering from terrible birth defects that made them look like that. Again, hard to know. The one that was on the front page of the New York Times, they admitted was a child with a birth defect. But the opponents of Israel said, oh, yeah, so they're starving children with birth defects. You'd want to, the question is, what did they look like on October 6th? Did they look like that? Why is it that, I don't want to debate this, but I do find it strange that there is not a single photograph of a thin adult in Gaza. There's a lot of photographs and videos of normal looking people. They're having a horrible time. It's horrible. They've lost the lives of their family members. It's a awful tragedy. But I don't think Israel is deliberately starving the people of Gaza to death. And I don't think, if they are, that they've been very successful. It doesn't excuse what Israel's done. It could be Israel's done terrible war crimes. I'm open to that possibility. War is awful. But the ability of people to exaggerate, lie, or deceive, and refusing to retract those claims when proven otherwise, is deeply depressing. So this week's been awful, this last 2 weeks. Lots of stories that I think are either not true or exaggerated. And now we have, inconceivably, a idea that Israel's going to occupy Gaza. I can't imagine it. Is it a strategic ploy? I don't know. But I will say this. So the answer to your question is, it's horrible. The Israelis here, my American friends who've moved here, my Israeli-born and raised Israeli friends, are in deep despair. They don't want the war to keep going. We're tired of losing our young men. and we're tired of killing other people. I
Mm-hmm.
know it's hard to believe given the way people talk about Israel in the news, but we hate it too. We don't want to kill innocent Gazans. It's disgusting. So we don't know why we're at this point, but lurking, hovering over all this is 20 emaciated, barely alive people who were kidnapped 21 months ago for 660 plus days. And the world has mostly been quiet about it. No one's
Mm-hmm.
demanded that they come home. The Red Cross has never demanded that they get access to them. The world has not pushed Qatar, that is the host of many Hamas leaders, to make progress on this. The opposite. Israel needs to lay down their arms and just move on. Next to a homicidal group of folks who've said they want to do October 7th over and over again. Having said all that, I'm ready for the war to end. I would love for it to end, even imperfectly. And then I want to add one thing, and then you can respond or ask something else. In the midst of this moment, it's very hard to understand what the future holds. And there is a natural tendency to be depressed because things inevitably on any one day don't go well. So the glass looks incredibly half empty here in Israel among the Israelis I know. And yet, there's some really amazingly positive things that have happened over the last 21 months. The apparent end of Iran as a threat to Israel's existence, the end of Hezbollah as a military threat, at least in the short run. Both of these are in the short run. Who knows how long it'll last? The devastating dismantling, but not defeat, of Hamas, which is imperfect, but a good step. They're bad people. They're bad for Israel, and they're bad for Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
It's really the most important thing to say. And yet somehow the world wants to keep them in power. I don't, ceasefire, let them keep their, crazy. So I'm very agnostic about this moment. It feels horrible. So I don't want to deny that. And it's been a bad 2 weeks. Israel's reputation has taken a pounding among Americans, not just university folk and not just Western European protesters. So it's, or Australian protesters for that matter. It's a bad time. But I remain optimistic, even though I'm not sure why. So we'll see. Let's talk in a year.
Yeah, so just a couple quick points on various things you said. One, I've been sort of pointing this out to people, that famine is a plural word. And like, if there was actual famine, the Western media wouldn't have to work so hard to find
Sad, yeah.
an emaciated kid, right? I mean, it's like, and they
or
would,
adult, yeah,
or an adult, yeah. I mean, but like the picture on the front page of the New York Times, the fact that his well-fed brother was standing next to him should have elicited some journalistic curiosity. Is like, do you like him more? I mean, like, why is he well-fed and this one not? Like that kind of thing. It bothers me. It can drive you to distraction. The
Don't feel bad about it. It's only the paper of record that has 55 million followers on X that instead of posting not a correction, but a note about the medical condition of that poor child, they posted it on their account that has 89,000 followers,
right,
not the
PR
one that has
account,
55 million. That'll drive me to distraction.
So two questions. It was one last point is you hear this. I've heard or read a bunch of different mainstream reporters talk about how the phrase keeps coming up. Israel has quote unquote squandered its moral authority by what it's doing in Gaza over the last couple of weeks, and it's sort of a very Russ Roberts point, but squandered kind of has a meaning, right? It means you wasted money, you wasted a resource on something unproductively, right? Bought some beans that turn out not to be magic, right? That kind of thing. And when you talk about, really set back Iran, just hollowed out Hezbollah, did enormous damage, we'll see, to Hamas. You could say it spent down its moral authority, but it got something in return that is actually tangibly valuable to Israel. And I think a lot of people just don't take that stuff seriously. They also just don't take seriously the fact that Hamas is the government of Gaza, and a normal, sane, decent government would lay down its arms and do everything it could to feed its people if, in fact, there was the kind of famine they're talking about. But the famine is a feature, the famine talk, at least, is a feature, not a bug for their philosophy.
Yeah.
The question I want to ask, though, is like, so you're clearly fluent in the biases against Israel in the media argument, right? I've been arguing for a very long time that if you take the just sort of the basic formal logic of the argument of structural racism or structural sexism, the UN is clearly in sort of irrefutably structurally anti-Semitic, insofar as they condemn Israel by orders of magnitude more than any other country that do much, much worse things.
Yeah.
It's like, what? So the question is, though, like when you talk to Americans, and you're now in your sort of mensch, everything is complicated mode, and people say, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm just anti-Zionist. How do you parse that? How do you explain to people? First of all, how do you think about it yourself? Right? When does criticism of Israel or Israel's policies turn into something more than simply anti-Zionism? And how do you have a litmus test for trying to figure that out? A heuristic?
Can I talk about the squadron first?
Sure.
And then we'll come back to that.
You can do whatever you want.
Yeah. I think Israel has squandered some of its moral capital with some own goals, meaning we've harmed ourselves in the way we've behaved and the way we've talked about the way we behave. The worry, Israel's done a terrible job in communicating its goals, alternative narratives. Some say it would make a difference. You might be right. But I wish we'd tried. So that's one thing I want to say. The weird part of this, and this is history will make its own assessment of this. We didn't have much moral capital on October 8th.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's what's so strange and difficult as a Jew and an Israeli to accept, that people all over the world said, by any means necessary. That was a banner that I remember vividly. I think it was shown on the wall of a building at George Washington University in D.C. It was certainly, I remember, a giant banner at a protest in London right after October 7th. The celebration of October 7th by academics and by others was deeply dispiriting, and a wake-up call for Jews that said, this is not the world that you've become used to. And that informs the way I think about anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism. Of course, you can criticize Israel without being anti-Semitic. Right. Israelis do it all day.
Yeah. I've never met an Israeli who didn't criticize Israel. I mean, literally not one.
And we march in the streets.
Yeah.
In the tens and sometimes hundreds of thousands protesting the current policies, because we are a real democracy. And they have been broken up occasionally with water hoses when they block major highways, which I think that's a mistake. But nobody gets put in jail for protesting, and no one's executed for protesting. And the Supreme Court here remains somewhat powerful and has our prime minister on trial while he's trying to prosecute a war. It's quite a circus here. So I still think there are things Israel can defend, but I also believe or I've come to believe, that the way the world looks at this is not just a question of Zionism. Just to take one example, a prominent public intellectual who I will not name on X recently has been writing about the Nakba, which is the quote catastrophe of 1948. 1948 was really hard on the Arabs, the Palestinians who lived here in what was then called Palestine as part of the British Mandate. It was run by the Brits. And it didn't turn out well for the Palestinians who were here in 1948. Many of them fled because they were chased by Israeli military or were terrorized by Israeli military. That happened. A lot of them left because they were told to leave by Arab leaders in other countries who said, get out of the way, we're going to reclaim Israel, Palestine for the Arabs. We'll get rid of this pesky Jewish state. But it's not ethnic cleansing. I think there were about 750,000 Arabs in Palestine when Israel declared a state in 1948. We were immediately invaded. About 250,000 stayed behind. Somehow they didn't get ethnically cleansed. There are now 2 million of them. They live as my fellow citizens. I just went to the pharmacy and was served my blood pressure medicine by the Arab Israeli pharmacist. They're very involved in medicine. They're very involved. I've had Arab Israeli doctors examine me in the emergency room, in clinics. They're part of this country. They get to vote. They get subsidized education like every Israeli. They don't have to serve in the army. They can. Some do, which is extraordinary. So they have a pretty good life. I'm sure they have horrible situations of all kinds because they're not in a country that they run, that their identity is part of. I get it. It's sad. But please don't say 1948 was ethnic cleansing. It's a lie. So all these things are, so when we talk about the distinction between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism, if you consistently say things that aren't true about the Jewish state, what does it make you? You're not an anti-Zionist. You don't like Jews. You don't like there's a Jewish state. You don't like that there's a place for Jews to have a haven. I don't know what it is. It's a psychological phenomenon. I'm not going to. So the real distinction to make is people who have honest criticisms of Israeli policy can even exist. You could even have an honest argument about the existence of Israel. You could say there shouldn't be a Jewish state. You could say it was a terrible mistreatment of indigenous Palestinians. But don't tell me there weren't Jews here at the same time who are indigenous and have been here for over 2,000 years. Just don't lie about it. If you're lying about it relentlessly and you have no curiosity for what the actual truth is, I start to wonder if maybe it's anti-Semitic. And by the way, I don't like that phrase, Jew hatred.
I don't like it either. Yeah, I mean,
people hate Jews. Okay, I used to read about it. Now I see it. It's sad.
The phrase anti-Semitism was coined by Wilhelm Marr to make it sound so much more scientific and sophisticated. In part because anti-Semitism or Jew hatred prior to that period was more theological, and now it was biologically racist. We could prove that, and it was based in all sorts of garbage, philology and whatnot. So I just don't want to end on such a dour note.
Yeah, good move. Let's say something cheerful. The Red Sox won. They won 6 in a row. Really amazing team that no one expected anything from.
I'm going to have. By the way, I'm having Barry Strauss on here in about an hour, and he's got a new book out, Rome versus the Jews. So we will get into Jewish indigeneity in the region quite a bit.
Nice.
Shortly. And I managed to say indigeneity correctly in the first try.
Yeah. Have you read Constantine's Sword?
No, I haven't.
Take a look at it. You will find it interesting. You might ask Barry Strauss about it, but it's awkward if you haven't read it and don't know anything about it. It's a fascinating book.
I can blame you. I can say Russ Roberts wants me to ask you about Constantine's Sword. It sounds kind of cool. It's name droppy. All right, so let's just sort of veer back for just 2 seconds to the trade thing where we began, just so I can, if I think one of the things that people don't get is that, forget whether trade deficits matter, which I think is a BS thing. I think you had Doug Irwin on talking about how we should just not have just don't collect the data, right? It's like,
well, we're on the way. We're on the way to that.
There you go. Yeah. But so if you tax trade, right, which is what tariffs are, it is true that the exporter might come down in price in order to maintain the sales and the market share and all that kind of stuff. And it is true that some of it will get passed on to the consumer and through higher prices, or the importer can accept lower profit margins, right? Am I missing some fourth option, some third kind of heat, some other thing that happens to this money? And the question I wanted to ask you at the beginning, and that's is, as you know, again, far better than I do, I'm sure you have a tattoo that says this, that inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. It's Milton Friedman's thing. There is a debate about whether or not, there's a really dorky debate, which I kind of love, about whether or not tariffs are inflationary or whether they just increase prices, which I think is awesome, right? And the thing I keep thinking about is, almost all the time when we talk about too much money chasing too few goods, we're talking about there being too much money, right? We printed too much money kind of thing. But the reason why this could be inflationary, I think, again, I'm going to defer to you on this, is that we're going to have fewer goods and the same amount of money, right?
Yeah.
Because we're shrinking the supply of goods, and that's another way you can get inflation, because the demand is curve. I'm going to get myself into trouble, into some sort of quicksand here. So am I right? Is there any other, if you tax trade, export, the seller can come down on price, the importer can come down on profits, or the consumer can pay more? Is there a fourth option there?
It's a big Pandora's box you just opened up. let me try to take a crack at a few pieces of it.
Okay, sorry about that.
That's okay. I do believe inflation is everywhere and always a monetary phenomenon, but it is possible that over a very short period of time, a decrease in the supply of goods could look like inflation, because while things were adjusting, prices would rise because it's the same amount of money, say, chasing fewer goods. So that it's not a ridiculous idea. I think worrying about inflation is a red herring. It's the kind of thing people invoke to try to make their side sound better. Oh, that's going to cause inflation. And that's like, I don't know. It's just, that's not the big issue. It's a little bit, I'm going to cut through the Gordian knots.
Okay.
And try to give you a slightly simpler way to think about it. And then I'll put a footnote on for the other side. When you tax something, you get less of it. It's not complicated, that part. It's just not. And when you have less stuff, it's not great. You might be tempted to say, yeah, but then we'll make more of our stuff to make up the difference. It could happen. Actually, it can't under formal modeling, but let's just say that there could be an offset of some proportion that might help that. But fundamentally, we're going to have less stuff. The prices will rise for everybody. So you can't have foreign goods of a particular quality being cheaper than American goods or more expensive. They've got to have similar prices for goods of similar quality. So most economists would say that if you put a tax on a foreign good, it's going to raise its price. They could try to save their market share by lowering price, but where their profit's going to come from. It's not, you're assuming they're
Right.
making all this extra money now. They can decide to make do with less. Usually in a fairly competitive world, those margins are thin.
Mm-hmm.
So what's going to happen is that the least productive foreign sellers go out of business. There's a higher price. The American producers raise their price to that amount. You say, oh, they don't have to, though. Why would they do that? They're not. That would be really greedy. Well, the problem is that if you have a foreign good at a high price and a local good domestically produced at a lower price, everyone's going to try to buy the domestic one. That starts to push the price up, and eventually they'll be the same. But that's not the same in every dimension because there's going to be fewer goods coming in from abroad. And although the American producers might make a little more, it's not going to make up the difference for reasons we're not going to get into because it would be too complicated. But the gist of it is we're going to have less stuff and consumers are going to pay more. Guess who likes that? Producers, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And some of their workers will benefit some from that. But the average person's hurt because they have to pay more for everything. Right. It's not the road to prosperity. Okay, so that's the first thing. Is it inflationary? I don't care. It's not important. It'll end in a relatively short period of time unless we're constantly raising the tariffs on a continual basis.
Right. And the tariffs are taking money out of the economy too, which is part of the monetary thing, right? So
it's too complicated. I have no idea.
Okay. Fair enough.
So it's not the road to prosperity. It will benefit certain groups at the expense of others. The average person will pay more for stuff, whether it's domestically or foreign produced. Now, the only footnote to that is that we're really big buyer of foreign goods. Mm-hmm. And in theory, if you reduce the demand by us for those foreign goods, there is a theoretical possibility that the prices could actually go down and not up. I guess we'll see, won't we? We'll find out. Well, maybe, because maybe they won't collect the data accurately anymore. But we'll see. I'm somewhat optimistic that we'll find out what the result of this is. The historical record for this strategy is not good. Maybe I'll be wrong. We'll find out. I hope.
You said a little bit like the pilot who just smashes all the gauges in the cockpit and says, we'll find out if we land or if we crash. Who knows?
We will. We definitely will.
We don't need these things.
No.
Russ Roberts, thank you so much for doing this. I'd love to have you back. You have an open invitation. And stay safe out there. And, best of luck.
Thanks, John. It's always fun.
Okay. Obviously, don't close your browser.
Yep.
And 2, I need you to say, if you want to say it in Hebrew, to be very popular, it's this stupid joke. It's this dad joke I can't get rid of, where I do a close and then I say, I'll see you next time. The guest voice comes back on and says, no, you won't. This is a podcast. It's complicated without being interesting, but I promise it won't embarrass you. You'll be rejoining the ranks of some of America's foremost public intellectuals who've done it. Can I just say I will see you the next time in Hebrew, which I can say very easily. Let's see if anyone catches it. That'd be fine. Because there was a huge controversy about whether or not the idiomatic "no, you won't" is possible in Israel, and the Jews have been arguing about this ever since. So I'm going to cut that Gordian knot too. All right, go ahead, just say it. All right, so Russ Roberts has left the studio. I apologize for the lurching, veering nature of my interview techniques and the way that we just sort of swung hard around and did a U-turn back to trade. But I'm kind of glad that we did. I really can't emphasize enough what a fan I am of Russ's. And I think it's fitting, given his intellectual humility, how humble he sounds here, in his sort of discussion of himself. But there's a lot of depth to some of the things that he's saying that he's just sort of letting float by like the tip of an iceberg, that I really appreciate. And we'll obviously put in links to his podcast, EconTalk. Again, it's been around for a long time. If you listen to the early episodes, the audio sounds like he's a ham radio operator, or that somebody had a portable recorder at an academic conference in the audience. But it's very well produced now, and you don't have to like every episode, right? It's sort of like The Remnant. Like either you're interested in the topic and you want to hear it all the way through because you're so interested in the topic, or you know nothing about the topic and you know nothing about the guest, and you listen to it for 10 minutes and you're like, I don't need to hear this whole thing. That's fine. I don't think he'd take offense. I wouldn't take offense if you guys had the same attitude. But if you give it the 10 minutes, you'll often find out that you're actually much more interested in something than you thought you were. And on Israel stuff, well, we'll have plenty more to talk about all of that. I generally am with Russ in his characterization of these things. And it's just a bummer. So with that, thanks for listening, and I will see you next time.
Lo Yonah. להתראות.